Hey you, welcome to my channel, Year and a Day. My name is Jenny and today I felt like just making myself a cup of coffee, sitting down and having a lovely chat about tarot decks. Now, if you've seen my last video, you might have heard me mention that I am not really on top of things health-wise at the moment. Now, I'm not saying that to throw a pity party for myself, but I am saying it because in times where I feel powerless, it is so easy to despair or feel hopeless. And it's very important for me in those times to remind myself that even though I cannot change the actual situation, I can shift my focus onto more positive things. And for me, that can be anywhere between settling down and reading a book or playing a video game, making art, journaling, or working with my tarot decks. My tarot decks are a real source of comfort for me. So when I saw the hashtag favorite jeans decks the other day, that was created by Shanna D here on YouTube, I knew that would be the perfect hashtag to do a VR for. I will leave a link to Shanna's original video down below. I will put my coffee to the side and let's dive in. Shanna came up with 10 prompts that I will pick decks for in this video. Let's start with the first one. A well-worn sweater, a deck that wraps you in quiet wisdom. For this one I chose the Majestic Earth Tarot. The Majestic Earth Tarot is an indie deck that is, I think, currently out of print. The deck consists of classical paintings and there's a heavy focus on landscapes and scenery. There are some people in the deck, but they are often very small, somewhere tucked away in the scene. And they are not the main focus of the deck. So when it comes to quiet wisdom, as stated in this prompt, nature was one of the first things that came to mind for me. This is a deck that really feels very calming. I love nature and I especially love to be alone with nature. All these beautiful scenes in the Majestic Earth Tarot just feel like a breath of fresh air. And there is this real quietness and calm about it for me. The deck also has several keywords and other associations with the elements, for example. So there's plenty to get out of this deck when it comes to the tarot meanings relating to the cards. So even flipping through the cards now, it really feels like a quiet and peaceful place. But maybe because classical paintings are being used and there is some history there as well, it just feels like a deck that has several layers attached to it. So for the first prompt, a well-worn sweater, a deck that wraps you in quiet wisdom, I picked the Majestic Earth Tarot. The second prompt is a familiar walking path, a deck that knows where you're headed before you do. And for this one I chose the Wildwood Tarot. This is a copy that I trimmed, so I cut off the white borders and I also etched it with this kind of slightly glimmering golden color. And this is one of my most beloved tarot decks in my collection. So to start with, I really love the artwork by Will Worthington. And I also really love the themes within this deck. There are pagan and druidry themes throughout this deck. And when going back to the guidebook, it is also very clear that the Wildwood Tarot has a kind of vision of its own. And it's a vision that I can quite relate to. It goes back to how modern day society relates to nature. And I feel like the Wildwood Tarot has some pretty outspoken ideas about that in the guidebook, which I personally really appreciate. But let's go back to the prompt. Because the prompt was a familiar walking path, a deck that knows where you're headed before you do. Now, I use the tarot mainly from a psychological point of view. Therefore, I do not really do any predictive readings. Even if I am doing, let's say, a year ahead spread, it is not really meant as a predictive reading. It is much more an interactive way for me to think about my intentions for the year ahead, and not something that I really feel like predicts the future and sets it in stone. That being said, when I started using the Wildwood Tarot, it became very quickly very clear to me that this is not a very light-hearted deck that I want to use for any ordinary day readings or small questions. This deck really felt very heavy-hitting to me, not in a bad way, but it just seemed to really point out some things that were so spot on for me about big life choices, or just very big things in my life, that I very quickly realized that this is just not a deck that I want to use for small questions or a daily card pull, for example. And I've had some absolutely beautiful experiences with this deck. And that's one of the things that I really love about tarot, because I would kind of describe myself as a non-believer. I don't really believe in any bigger powers or any bigger thing sending me messages through the cards or anything like that. And yet, when working with tarot, I experience a lot of really beautiful magical moments of synchronicity and just alignment with my reality, and that is such a lovely thing to experience. And it's something that I very consciously have decided not to try and rationalize. It also doesn't mean that I feel like I need to change my beliefs or my vision regarding the tarot or my worldview. I just really accept the fact that there are things that I cannot really rationalize or explain. And I really embrace that magic that brings into my life. Not sure if that makes any sense, but it kind of makes sense to me. So for the second prompt, a familiar walking path, a deck that knows where you're headed before you do, I chose the Wildwood Tarot. For the third prompt, warm socks on a cold floor, a deck that grounds you in comfort, I chose the Flow Tarot. The Flow Tarot is one of only a few photography decks in my collection. And especially a deck like this, which uses stock photography, is not something that I'm usually pulled to. But the Flow Tarot is absolutely an exception for me. First of all, the photographs that are chosen for this deck are absolutely beautiful. There are just so many beautiful colors and images in this deck that it really makes every card so interesting and beautiful. But I also really love the fact that the cards have keywords and the deck comes with a beautiful guidebook with beautiful messages. And there is something about those keywords being on the cards that kind of makes it a very easy reader as well. Even when you know the tarot meanings, there's just kind of a convenience there when you have keywords or key phrases. So even when you're tired or you don't want to think too much and you just want to have that comfort and convenience of keywords, then a deck like this is really lovely to work with. And that is why I chose the Flow Tarot for the third prompt. Warm socks on a cold floor, a deck that grounds you in comfort. The fourth prompt is Your Grandmother's Recipe Box, a deck that holds generational wisdom. And for this prompt I chose the Druidcraft Tarot. I am keeping my copy in this little drawstring bag, and I also modified this one quite heavily. I cut off both the borders and the titles of this deck and I etched it myself. And as the name suggests, this deck is all about druidry and kind of combining witchcraft and druidry and stuff like that. It comes with a really good extensive guidebook that might be one of my favorite guidebooks within my collection. It's a guidebook that I also sometimes use with other decks, just because I really appreciate the interpretations and information. The reason why I chose this deck for the prompt, a deck that holds generational wisdom, is because this really speaks to a world long gone. This captures a moment in human history where we lived in closer relation to nature, where there was more balance between humankind and nature, where we were very aware of the earth and the way it operates. And I really feel like modern day society has almost completely lost that connection. So working with a deck like the Druidcraft Tarot really is a way for me to seek a connection with those times long gone and to tap into a different kind of being and an age where the balance between humans and nature was very different from what we know today. So that's why I chose the Druidcraft Tarot for the fourth prompt, Your Grandmother's Recipe Box, a deck that holds generational wisdom. The fifth prompt is a window seat on a stormy day, a deck that makes space for shadow work. And for me that has to be the Reclaim Oracle. I have a very, very deep love and respect for the Reclaim Oracle. I think the illustrations are beautiful, but I also think they capture the emotions and the keywords so very brilliantly. This is not a very light-hearted deck. I wouldn't just shuffle these cards for a daily card pull in the morning, for example. It's just way too heavy hitting for that, at least for me. It is dealing with very big and intense emotions, but at the same time it does it in a very loving way. I always feel less alone in a way when working with the Reclaim Oracle, because all these different emotions or situations are captured so beautifully. And somehow it's kind of a comforting feeling that there is at least one other person on this planet who knows what it feels like to feel like that. And that is such a huge, beautiful thing that the creator has done with this deck. It also manages to kind of capture the emotions or situations very cleverly. And it often gives me a little bit more insight or another way of thinking about the keywords on the card. And it's just a deck that keeps surprising me every time I pick it up. And that is why I chose the Reclaim Oracle for the 5th prompt. A window seat on a stormy day. A deck that makes space for shadow work. The 6th prompt is that one pair of jeans you never have to think about. A deck that just gets you without trying. And for this one I chose the Dreaming Way Tarot. This is actually another deck that I modified and that I cut the borders off. And it actually took me quite a long time to get this deck. It was on my wish list for a long time. I was worried that the deck might be a bit too quirky, or I don't know, I for some reason wasn't sure if I would really vibe with it. But as soon as I got this deck, the readings just came very, very easily. For me, this deck has real summer vibes. It's something about the watercolor style of illustrations and the kind of freshness of the green colors. So this one just feels like a breeze, which is why I chose it for the 6th prompt. That one pair of jeans you never have to think about. A deck that just gets you without trying. And that is the Dreaming Way Tarot. Prompt number 7. Your chipped but perfect coffee mug. A deck that doesn't need you to be fancy to show up. For this one I chose the Hollow Valley deck of symbols. I've shown this deck many times before here on my channel because it's one of my favorite oracle decks within my collection. It comes with an amazing guidebook that has really extensive, beautiful messages. It also kind of breaks down the illustrations in all the different symbols and their meanings. And throughout the years I've done so many beautiful readings with this deck. The illustration style and the layout and the fonts and the fact that it's a black and white deck. At first glance this deck might seem very minimal or simplistic, but it has so many layers, also thanks to the guidebook. It is also a complete exception to the rule for me, because I often say that I really want clear keywords and I do not want to have to rely on a guidebook for my readings. But this is a deck that I very gladly rely on the guidebook with. Some of the keywords are very clear, but most really need some clarification from the guidebook for me. But in this case, I don't mind. And I often turn to this deck with dilemmas or issues, or when I'm really struggling with certain questions or situations. And this deck never really fails to give me a very clear and beautiful advice. So even though the illustrations and the color scheme and everything keeps it quite simplistic, this deck never fails to show up for me, no matter how hard my questions are. And that's why I chose it for prompt number 7, your chipped but perfect coffee mug. A deck that doesn't need you to be fancy to show up. And that's the Hollow Valley deck of symbols. On with prompt number 8. That book you've read so many times the pages are falling out. A deck that knows all your stories and loves you anyway. This was a very easy one for me, and I chose the Self-Love Tarot. This is actually another deck that I modified a bit by etching it in blue. And as you can see, it is wearing off here and there, but I don't love it any less for it. Now obviously the theme of this deck suits the prompt perfectly, the Self-Love Tarot. And it actually comes with both a little white booklet as well as a slightly bigger guidebook. And this whole deck and all the messages are just so absolutely loving and positive. Even for the more heavier cards, there is always this very loving and supporting energy. And this just really feels like a deck that you can turn to at your worst moments, at your hardest moments. And it will be there for you. It will be there to support you and to lift you up. So this was really a no-brainer for me for prompt number 8. That book you've read so many times the pages are falling out. A deck that knows all your stories and loves you anyway. And it's the Self-Love Tarot. Prompt number 9. That playlist you've had since high school. A deck that knows all your phases and still vibes with you. And I chose the Outgrow Yourself. As you can see, my copy is quite well loved. And it's another one I etched myself. And as you can see, there are plenty of signs of usage on these cards, but I really don't mind. It just makes me love this deck even more. And it really shows that I've had this deck for a while now and that I use it quite often. And there are certainly decks that I am very precious with within my collection. But I have also come to a stage in my practice where I can really appreciate it when I see those signs of wear on a deck. and where it actually adds to the beauty of a deck for me. Outgrow Yourself is really a tough love deck in my collection. I always call these little creatures my little garden demons, because that's how they kind of show up for me or come alive for me, as these little non-human feral creatures that totally go their own way and cause chaos wherever they go. But when you listen to them, they actually have very wise things to say. It's really to the point, and I really feel like I shouldn't ask questions that I don't want the answers for, because this deck will tell me loud and clear. But I also never feel judged by this deck. I feel like even if I am a bit chaotic or feral myself, I will just be welcomed with open arms by these little garden demons of the Outgrow Yourself, and they will not judge me for it. They will just be there with their sometimes a bit harsh truths, but they will be there for me no matter what. So for prompt number 9, that playlist you've had since high school, a deck that knows all your phases and still vibes with you, I chose the Outgrow Yourself Tarot and Oracle deck. And then for the last one, your go-to take-out order, a deck that just works without the fuss. And for that one, I chose the Lighted Window Tarot. This is also a deck that I've showed quite a few times on my channel already. I also made a whole first impressions video about it. It was a Kickstarter I backed, and after a very smooth campaign, this arrived at my doorstep. I really love this one from the very first time I used it. Normally I am not really a fan of pip decks. I really love illustrated decks. But in this case I really don't mind the pips. There are also little hints in all the pips that do relate to the meanings of the cards, which I appreciate. And it's fun to see if you can spot those or interpret those yourself. So for me this is a beautiful balance between all the beautifully illustrated cards and then the pip cards of the minors. So for prompt number 10, your go-to takeout order, a deck that just works without the fuss, I chose the cozy and calming vibes of the Lighted Window Tarot. And that's it. That was my VR to the hashtag favorite jeans decks. That was started by Shanna D. Thank you so much, Shanna, for creating this fun hashtag. It was a perfect excuse for me to just sit down and go over some of my comfort decks. I hope you enjoyed going over these decks with me. And please let me know in the comments if you have any decks that you turn to for comfort. I would love to hear about them. And with all of that being said, I wish you all a lovely rest of your day or night, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!